Hello and welcome back to another episode of Views from the Top, powered by Oriad Wealth Partners. My name is Scott Sturgeon. I am the founder and senior wealth advisor at Oriad Wealth Partners, and I am just so happen to also be the host of this show. Thank you so much for tuning in already. Excited to have you here. On today's episode, we are talking ESOPs, and no, you don't need to say bless you. That is an actual acronym for what's called an employee stock ownership plan. It's more or less a retirement plan built for employees of a company, really to provide them ownership in that company with a few kind of twists and turns along the way. And so on today's episode, we're going to talk through, number one, what is an ESOP? Number two, what are some pros and cons of an ESOP, being an employee as a participant in one? And number three, how exactly would an ESOP factor into my overall financial plans? And maybe even more importantly, for those who are maybe looking to retire in the next several years, how does an ESOP factor into my retirement plans in general? So hopefully addressing or at least kind of navigating all three of those questions. And so the first point, really the big question, is what is an ESOP? And I think there's a very long-winded answer to this, but the very shortest, most succinct that I can at least come up with is that an ESOP is very similar to a 401k retirement plan that maybe you've had at some point through either your current employer or a former employer. Basically, it's typically a traditional 401k is a pre-tax investment account that you are contributing to with pre-tax dollars. You haven't paid taxes on it yet, each paycheck typically. And an incentive to do that, your employer will also contribute a certain percentage into your 401k account to ideally invest those funds, grow them over time, and then in retirement you pull them out, live off them, so on and so forth. ESOPs are kind of a twist on that, in that it is typically either the employee is also contributing money into the ESOP itself, or the employer is quite simply only making contributions in the form of company stock into the ESOP. And so really the benefit to the employee is that this account is held for their benefit by the employer or by some third party with that employer stock in the plan. And it more or less allows the employee to gain ownership in the company that they're working for. But similarly to a 401k, it's all pre-tax money, so there's been no taxes paid on it. That's really actually, when we get into kind of the second point, is pros and cons. Right out of the gate, that's a huge pro for especially high-earning employees of a company. You're receiving more or less shares of that company, but you're not having to pay any taxes for that, just because it's all pre-tax money. Now, granted, later on in life, if you keep that ESOP, it grows over time, and you withdraw funds from, typically move the ESOP into, some other qualified account, you're going to withdraw funds from that account and pay taxes on it then. The IRS always gets its piece. But ideally, at that point in time, you're in a lower tax bracket, somewhere in like retirement or something like that, to where the tax hit to you on your personal income statement is not as bad as maybe if you had received a very large bonus from your employer. So the added tax benefit too, I think, is that if you actually are contributing some of your salary into your ESOP, the benefit is that you're not having to pay income on that income either. So again, for high earners, it's kind of almost like an income deferral, if you will, of just similar to a 401k. If money's going into the 401k, you're not paying tax on it, at least when you're being paid. So you're kicking the tax can down the road. That can be really advantageous for tax planning purposes, to put you into lower brackets by the time those funds are withdrawn. The same exact concept with an ESOP. You're deferring income into company stock. Now, another pro I would say of an ESOP in general is, and maybe even bigger than the tax itself, is just the ownership piece. I firmly believe that employee owners behave differently than those, average employee who's just standard, W-2 or maybe has a 1099 or what have you. When you think about what a company does, or kind of what its directive is, at least from the business or investment class you might take, is that it ideally is to return value to shareholders. And I think it's also, I would argue, also important along the way to, retain employees as best as possible, to provide benefit to a society or to other companies or what have you, whatever its directives might be. But certainly shareholder value is a big one. And when you think about an ESOP, it checks a lot of those boxes, right? It's basically any profits the company is generating go to the shareholders. And when you're also an employee, you're getting your paycheck and a certain benefit of those profits via the shares that you own in the ESOP. That's a win-win. So I think that's a big benefit. I think it makes employees a little more efficient in what they do and a little more focused on betterment of the company overall. And I think also it's probably good for retention as well. The last, and I think kind of a tertiary point on the pros of an ESOP is just that it's an automatic savings account, more or less. If you are required to opt, if it's a voluntary opt-in, and you just so happen to kind of set maybe a certain percentage of your salary that's going into the ESOP, or your employer is just putting shares in the ESOP for you, that's more or less just automatic savings that you're doing without even have to thinking about it, which when we think about kind of trying to accrue wealth and build investment accounts over time, a really good way to do that is to set it and forget it, if you will. Lots of pros, also a few cons. We can't get away without saying that there are some potential downsides to an ESOP. The first one of those I would say is absolutely just a concentration risk. And what I mean by concentration risk is that more or less when you have an ESOP, I think it can be very easy to say, at least kind of mentally account and say, well, I have this large ESOP, my company's crushing it, that's going to continue to happen, I'm an employee of it, I know the company backwards and forwards, nothing bad can happen. Well, the reality is that regardless of whatever company you work for, there is always a potential, albeit maybe very small, that something negative could happen to your company. And by having, more or less saying, well, I'm just going to let my ESOP do all of my retirement planning for me, having all of that ownership concentrated in one stock of one company that you work for, that you're also getting your paycheck from, can be a little bit risky. And so sometimes it's helpful to, when factoring in kind of the overall blend or makeup of all of your assets, to factor that in. It's not uncommon for people to kind of buy into the company that they work for. They're there every day and they want to support it. And I totally get that. But diversification is an important piece of reducing risk. And so making sure that you're factoring in, if you do have a large concentration of employee stock or employer stock in your ESOP, that maybe you're diversifying your other holdings outside of the ESOP to reflect that concentration that you might have. The second piece, I think, is also just a concentration risk, but it has more so to do with taxes. So we talked about how ESOPs are all pre-tax dollars, right? There's been no taxes paid on the funds that you're receiving. That can be not problematic, but it can be kind of a hiccup can be created when you go to retire and all of your investment assets are held in only pre-tax accounts. Not a terrible problem to have by any means. But the issue is that when you go to withdraw from those accounts, you're paying income tax on every withdrawal you have. That tax piece, if we can diversify that in other places to reflect kind of our pre-tax setup in an ESOP, that can be really beneficial as well. We do what's called Roth conversions sometimes for new retirees, or certain other strategies to kind of look at reducing your tax bill over time, I think is a big piece, but that tax concentration, I think, is an important element here. So third point, question, what have you, is how does an ESOP fit into really my overall financial plans and maybe more importantly, retirement plans or, long-term cash flow planning plans? And I wish I had a better answer, but the accurate as I can provide answer is that your plans and how an ESOP will incorporate into it is going to be very, very, very custom to your individual situation, your family situation, and planning around that. All of these elements factor in together and are going to dictate how that ESOP plan and really the investment account that generates from it or results from it is going to factor into your individual plans over time. So I think it's certainly by all means it can be really beneficial to have that ESOP there, to leverage and to add to net worth and your ability to retire over time, given kind of your time frame or objectives and things like that. But again, the answer is how is it going to custom fit to you is that it's going to be very custom fit to you. So I hope all of these 3 points are just generally kind of helpful. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Again, I'm Scott Sturgeon. I'm the Senior Wealth Advisor and founder at Oriad Wealth Partners. If questions like this come up in, just as you're laying awake at night, hopefully not laying awake at night, but just in generally thinking about the future and things like that, and any questions come up, by all means, I would encourage you to reach out. You can contact me directly at oriadwealth.com. You can also find our firm and myself on LinkedIn and Facebook, and among many other social media platforms and media platforms as well. So to conclude, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have questions, concerns, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, I'm Scott Sturgeon. Have a great rest of your day.